everyone, this is Madison, and I'm here to talk to you about celebrators versus participators and what every congregation needs to understand. So, I want to start by saying that for a period of time, my role in a small congregation was tracking attendance. Simple numbers like 10 adults, 5 kids, 3 people online, which services were growing, which programs were shrinking, which events brought people in. And yes, the events with food usually did better. The high holy holidays always brought larger crowds, and holiday celebrations brought energy and people through the doors. But after tracking attendance patterns for years, I started noticing something deeper. I realized our congregation wasn't really functioning as one unified group. There were different categories of people attending for very different reasons. And over time, I realized that our two largest groups were what I eventually started calling the celebrators and the participators. And later, when I became the spiritual leader of a small congregation, I realized something even more important. Those two groups rarely need the same thing from a service. Let's talk about the celebrators first. The celebrators are often looking for joy or music, holidays, this community connection, life cycle events, food, energy, and memorable Jewish experiences. And honestly, congregations absolutely need celebrators. Celebrators bring the warmth and the visibility to Jewish life. They help holidays feel alive. They often bring families, excitement, and energy into the building. They fill the building when sometimes your small congregation, it gets small, they fill it. And many congregations quietly depend on them more than they realize. The second group is the participators. And the participators are often deeply connected to the rhythm of Jewish life. They feel rooted in the community they pray with. They remember the traditions. They remember when things changed. That's important. And sometimes they remember why those changes happened. And sometimes they still disagree with those changes. Participators often find meaning in continuity, in familiarity. So be careful when you're around a tip, be careful when you're around participators that you may inadvertently start a new tradition. They believe in the steady rhythm of ritual life. They may be willing to try new things, but many are spiritually most comfortable inside the older, familiar structure of the service. Participators are often the people unlocking the building, setting up chairs, organizing services, making phone calls, and showing up week after week after week. They carry continuity like in their bones. And healthy congregations absolutely need them too. The core problem is when congregations stop understanding the difference between these two groups. Many congregations unknowingly program almost entirely for one group or the other. And let me give you 2 examples. Example 1 is Yom Kippur. For several years, I worked at a congregation that brought in a visiting rabbi for the high holy days. And because the participators were people willing to serve on the high holy day committee, they naturally had the loudest voice in shaping those services. Everyone was invited, but those are the ones who participated, hence the name participators, right? Every year they would request the full traditional Yom Kippur experience, the long services, the Jonah study, Minka, Nila, the break fast at exactly the right time, the complete liturgical structure of the service, including laying on the floor and putting your head on it. And honestly, that made sense. That was the service life they personally found meaningful. But there's one problem with that. The participators represented maybe 1/10 of the congregation. The larger celebrator group, the people who came primarily for the emotional, the communal experience of the holidays, the routine, did not have the stamina or the ritual familiarity for an 8-hour Yom Kippur day. And every year around 1 o'clock, like clockwork, people would quietly start leaving. Fewer would return for Nila, and many people didn't even make it to breakfast. Even some of the participants themselves started fading by late afternoon. So the participator group ended up with this awkward moment where that small handful of exhausted people felt obligated to remain for the full service they themselves had requested from the rabbi. The problem was that the problem wasn't that anybody was wrong. The problem was that one group designed the experience without fully considering the needs of the larger group. Let me talk about the second example, special services, because the opposite problem can happen as well. Recently, we went through several months of services filled with celebrations, holidays, b'nai mitzvahs, family program, special services. And because of that, I was creating modified new services over and over and over again. Now, modified services are usually shorter services. They're interactive services. They're child-centered. They're celebration-focused with moments of meaning attached to what's happening in that day. And honestly, many people loved them. They were energetic, they were accessible, they were welcoming, their kids could make it through. But over time, some of the participators quietly started telling me something important. They missed the rhythm of the traditional service. Certain prayers had disappeared. Certain liturgical moments kept getting shortened or removed for time. And they started feeling spiritually ungrounded. Because participators often do not only attend for celebration, they attend for continuity. Now, honestly, over time, I started noticing other kinds of attendees too. And maybe in future videos, I'll talk about some of those, the senior sitters, the invisibles, the online lurkers. But because every congregation has layers of participation, we don't always fully understand. But there was one additional group I realized was especially important as well. And I started calling them the celebratory participators. These were the people who loved the joy and energy of the holidays and special events, but also understood the importance of continuity and meaningful liturgy. They could bridge the gap between celebrators and participators. And honestly, small congregations desperately need those bridge people. However, just a quick side, the celebratory participators don't come weekly. They come for the holidays. So they're there for every holiday, but they're just there for holidays or celebrations. So let me give you an example using Purim. A few years ago, there was a congregation I knew of that had people just like any other group that would never miss Purim. Purim was their thing. They loved the joy, they loved the celebration, they loved the costumes and the energy of the holiday. It was a big thing. But there was a period of time where they didn't have anyone comfortable leading Purim, which is a classic small congregation problem. They didn't have anyone comfortable reading the Megillah. They didn't have enough trained lay leaders, not enough resources for consistent rabbinic support, so they couldn't hire anyone. So over time, the Purim service became shorter and shorter and shorter. And eventually one year, the whole thing lasted 15 minutes. About 10 minutes of service, about 5 minutes of Megillah reading, and that was it. And people, many, had driven 30 minutes or more to attend this holiday experience. And honestly, you could feel that something was missing. And it was actually the celebratory participators who helped understand the problem. They didn't necessarily want a traditional 3-hour service where you read the whole Megillah 3 times and all this happens. But they also needed the holiday to feel meaningful and substantial. They wanted celebration, but they also wanted experience. So eventually, a rotating routine was started. 1 year, it was a Purim Spiel style service, fun, interactive, theatrical. And another year, it was a more serious, dramatic reading with larger portions of the Megillah included, even if that meant reading them partially in English. And suddenly the holiday felt balanced again, and no one was upset that they drove a half an hour or more for a 15-minute service. So I think this is one of the most important things that congregational leaders need to understand. You can't effectively serve a community if you do not actually understand who is in that community. Because congregations are just not attendance or numbers. They're made up of different people seeking different forms of meaning, connection, continuity, celebration, and belonging. And once you begin recognizing whether your community is made up primarily of celebrators, participators, or a balance of both, because let's face it, each community has their own separate balance. It becomes much easier to create services and experiences that help those groups feel like one community instead of separate ones. And honestly, I think healthy congregations need both because communities need joy. They need celebration, they need continuity, and they need ritual memory. But most of all, they need people who feel seen and understood. Because when people feel understood, they are far more likely to feel connected. So, this is Small Bima, Big Torah, where small communities and their very real challenges deserve to be part of the congregation conversation. Thank you.